Happy New Year from our friends over at Manscaped. The ball has officially dropped, but that doesn't stop you from having to drop the ball on your balls in 2023. Join the 7 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with this exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com and use offer code SKILLUP for 20% off and free shipping. Click below to get to it or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Dead Space Remake. Holy shit, what a video game. Look, I'm not going to dwell on the Calisto Protocol in this review since I've well and truly said my piece on that, but I will say that even though that game had many obvious flaws, a part of my brain was like, maybe this is what Dead Space was like, and I just can't remember it because it's been so long. It's been 14 years since Isaac Clarke crash-landed on the USG Ishimura, and in that time, a lot of water has gone under the survival horror bridge. The death and rebirth of Resident Evil games, the Resident Evil remakes, Alien Isolation, The Evil Within 1 and 2, about 500 Silent Hill reboot rumors, with one of them finally coming true. Point is, there have been so many survival horror titles, and almost every new entry has edged the genre forward in key areas like presentation, combat, puzzles, environment design, and the all-important fear factor. With the genre having advanced so much then, was Dead Space really that good? Or did we just think it was that good? No, Dead Space was absolutely that good. I went back and replayed it recently in preparation for this review, and it is staggering how well that game holds up. Some parts of it have aged poorly, looking at you turret section, but on the whole, Dead Space provided a truly inspired archetype within the survival horror genre. The Ishimura was dense and atmospheric, and bringing each part of it back online felt so rewarding. The dismemberment-based combat was brilliant, forcing you to hold your nerve as you carefully aimed and fired, following up with desperate stomps afterwards to finish off your foes. Its narrative was thrifty but effective, dangling just the right amount of clues in front of you to keep you guessing without ever bogging you down in dull exposition. As I replayed Dead Space, I legitimately thought to myself, do you even need to remake this? The title holds up so well that it was difficult to see where EA Motive could take it. But having now rolled credits, I am so glad that Motive committed themselves to this task, because they have done an absolutely masterful job of remaking and improving this horror masterpiece. The Dead Space remake is one of the finest remakes we've ever seen across the entire spectrum of video games. Technically, it is very strong, with broadly excellent PC performance and stunning visuals that make the Ishimura one of the most immersive sci-fi environments you can explore in any game. The entire item and progression economy has been reworked to result in a more intuitive flow of new weapons and upgrades. The level design has been both subtly and majorly reworked depending on the section, with changes resulting in everything from more impressive looking spaces to deeper, more engaging puzzles to entirely new exploration paths. Combat is more terrifying than ever before, as almost every encounter has been remixed, dismemberment improved, and a new dynamic spawn system constantly keeps you on your toes. The Dead Space remake is not a new paint job, it is a fundamental overhaul of almost every aspect of the game, one that keeps everything that worked, removes everything that didn't, and adds in a whole bunch of new surprises that will make even regular visitors to the Ishimura feel like it's their first time there. In short, Motive absolutely nailed it, and the Dead Space remake is destined to be as much of a classic as the original was. We'll talk performance first. I tested Dead Space on 3 PCs, an RTX 4090 with an AMD Ryzen 5950X, an RTX 2080 Ti with an AMD Ryzen 3700X, and the humble Steam Deck. Sadly, I couldn't get Dead Space running on deck. It will boot and compile shaders, but after that it will hang at the pre-menu notice screens like the epilepsy warning. I tried this a few times until it eventually hard crashed my deck. Hopefully this gets an update in future to become deck compatible, but for now it does not work. On the RTX 2080 Ti machine, I gotta say, I was pretty damn impressed at how well this ran. This is typically a 1440p machine, but I always test 4K just to see what I can get away with. Bumping resolution to 4K Ultra settings DLSS set to performance, I was able to hit a reliable 45 FPS while playing. In most games, I'm shooting for 60, but here in a slow-moving, over-the-shoulder survival horror game, 45 FPS feels fine, and so that's how I played it. Given how well this runs on a 2080 Ti, it should be little surprised to learn that the RTX 4090 runs rings around it. At 4K Ultra settings, DLSS set to quality, I was averaging around 100 frames, topping out at 120 since that's where I capped it, and dropping to around 80 in some circumstances. I did 95% of my playthrough on the 2080 Ti, and I found performance to be generally very good. There were some dips, but given I was running this at 4K, I didn't mind, and none of them interfered with the overall experience. What about the whole stuttering thing that absolutely crippled the Calisto Protocol Protocol and a bunch of other recent releases. Well, the first time you load up Dead Space, it spends a huge amount of time compiling shaders. This will take 2 to 3 minutes, but once it's done, you never have to do it again. After that, there are some stutters here and there, but not often. There was one section I played through that was Stutter City, but it was so severe that I suspected it was an issue on my end, and restarting the game cleared it, so I'm hesitant to say definitively what that might have been. Outside of that, you will notice some big frame drops as you move between some areas. When I was entering lifts or the tram, I did notice a drop as low as 20 FPS while it loaded into a new space, but this was rare. Do note that this is a game intended to be played on an SSD, to the point where there's a prompt that flashes up the first time you boot up the game, warning you that HDDs will negatively impact game performance, so if you're playing on a PC, be sure to get it installed on the right drive. The install size is a thrifty 36 gigabytes, by the way, or 0.2 Forspokens, if you'd rather go by that metric. One very nice touch is how it handles loading in each time you load up the game. It automatically loads the most recent save, skipping the title screen entirely, so you can just press continue and you're immediately back in the action. I've never seen any game do this before, but now that I have, I'm firmly of the opinion that every game needs to do exactly this. Beyond that, I had zero crashes or graphical glitches, nor have I had any gameplay bugs. Outside of those minor stutters and frame dips, it has been a largely flawless experience, an all too rare occurrence in this age of PC ports. And as the icing on the cake, Dead Space looks absolutely incredible. There was and is something so humbling about crawling through the Ishimura when you're forced to consider its scale and function. The haunted houses we found ourselves in other survival horror games are just that, houses, or police stations, or towns. They are modestly sized, we can wrap our heads around their dimensions, and most likely see the limits of those dimensions for ourselves. We can't do that here in the Ishimura. While we may see a great many sections of it, we can never shake the feeling that it's just so much bigger than anything we've seen. We feel so tiny making our way through it, and that feeling only intensifies when you're reminded of the Ishimura's Galactus-like purpose. For the Ishimura is essentially a doomsday device, a planet cracker mining vessel. Its arrival in the skies above a planet heralding that planet's destruction. You see that process at work at various points throughout the experience, massive chunks of planet trapped in the Ishimura's jaws, gravity wells siphoning off smaller pieces for smelting and processing. The very bones of a planet ground to dust right before your eyes. Obviously, these sections make for great eye candy. Greater still here in the remake, where they are arguably the most visually impressive elements of the game. But more than just visual spectacle, I think these sections are horrific in their own right. This automated destruction on an unfathomable scale says so much about the hubris of the people who created it, and it makes the events of Dead Space feel all the more inevitable, for why should a machine such as this exist in the first place? To sustain this doom engine, the Ishimura is possessed of all the necessary mechanical gizzardry you'd expect to find aboard a vessel of this size. Engines, fueling centers, maintenance subfloors, engineering decks, med bays, hydroponic centers, comms arrays, and more. All of it connected by thousands of kilometers of dark, sweaty ventilation shaft-filled corridors, as well as a tram system that'll move you between major landmarks like the hangar and the bridge. The thing is, absolutely everything aboard the Ishimura is busted, but luckily I've got just the man for the job. You. You are Isaac Clarke, a low-level engineering grunt who may not know his way around a weapon, but he'll fix your 80-kiloton floating death machine in no time with little more than a stick of gum and some battery acid. The choice of Isaac as the protagonist creates this brilliant convergence of plot, setting, character, and gameplay. Much of the plot centers on what brought down the Ishimura, how and why some of its central functions were brought offline. Most of the chapters are centered on repairing those things, with puzzle challenges that aren't abstract logic puzzles like you'd find in Resident Evil. They're more straightforward and mechanical. Circuits, switches, centrifuges, air ducts, etc. The puzzles flow from the setting, which flow from the plot, and Isaac is literally the only man for the job. This makes Dead Space feel very immersive, not only because you're walking around a really creepy ship with not much more than a flashlight to guide your way, but because you're essentially role-playing a hammer in a world where everything is a nail. In the original game, Isaac was a silent protagonist, but in the sequels, he spoke. Here in the remake, he speaks too, and I don't know that it's an improvement. There was something in that silence of his. For whoever heard of a hammer that could talk, The singular focus and determination that he brought to bear as he grunted and heaved his way through the Ishimura was a focus and determination that we imbued him with, because that's what we imagined, and Isaac literally couldn't disagree. Here now he converses back and forth with those around him, offering his thoughts on next steps and reacting with surprise, horror, or hope at events, but none of his utterances seem to elevate things, at least not without trade-offs. Admittedly, yes, his ability to speak does allow for more narrative exposition than in the original game, and that exposition is good. It broadens both characters and the story, and Dead Space feels more dense as a result. But it does feel slightly less immersive, because now the limits of Isaac's persona are finite, set by the guardrails of the conversations he has with others, whereas before there were no limits to who or what Isaac might have been. It's kind of like that phrase, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than open your mouth and remove all doubt. Well, here it's like, better to be thought an unstoppable, single-minded, emotionally distant, dead-eyed killer handyman than open your mouth and reveal yourself to be just a normal dude. One thing that dawned on me as I replayed the original was just how much Dead Space was willing to offer its own unique take on the survival horror genre, and the best possible example of this is the combat. To that point, combat in survival horror games had been rooted in a number of key principles: resource starvation, limited mobility, and always aim for the head. Resident Evil 4, which had released 3 years prior to Dead Space, was a huge shot in the arm for the genre, making things feel much more actiony than ever before, but even then, it was still based on those core principles. If you go back and watch old dev diaries about the making of Dead Space, the creators all say that Resident Evil 4 was a big inspiration for them, but they weren't down with the whole stand still to fire thing, so they made sure that you could still move and shoot at the same time, making Dead Space feel smoother and more responsive than many of its contemporaries. The resource limiting thing is another. Dead Space isn't interested in starving you for the ammo you need to confront your foes. You almost always have more than enough, and if you don't, then you can just buy some. Your inventory is huge, and you don't need to spend time managing it, and health packs flow pretty freely and can also be purchased. So does this make Dead Space an action game or a survival horror game? Well, both really, because generously flowing resources don't matter all that much, because the game's not based on throughput. It isn't about the size of your ammo reserve, it's about how you use it. And that's where we get to the most interesting part of Dead Space's combat, dismemberment. To that point, shooting the zombies in the head or whatever weak spot they presented was generally the goal, and it was smart because it forced us to stand our ground and carefully aim, making each of our limited bullets count. And as we stood there carefully aiming, the zombie would shuffle closer and closer, creating more and more pressure, and at some point you just start dumping rounds into their chest because you were like, oh my god, they are going to eat my brain again. Dead Space absolutely could have done that again because that framework is timeless, it always works, but they did something else. They retained that same hold your nerve principle, forcing the player to carefully aim rather than indiscriminately fire, but now we were surgeons, lopping off limbs to stop our foes from advancing. Now every foe is a new writhing puzzle, where you tilt your weapon this way or that to get the perfect shot on a limb, and wait between each shot to see if you need another, and when they hit the ground you were like, now, do I go for the arms or for the head? This was all new, and it was fucking cool, and it only got better as you encountered different enemy types, all of whom had their own extremities that should be handled in different ways. And that's before you start talking about weapon variety, which, much like the setting, plot, and gameplay, is so perfectly convergent with this character. Isaac has only one traditional weapon in his entire arsenal, a pulse rifle, and it's the shittiest weapon by far, total garbage. The plasma cutter, the contact beam, the line gun, the ripper, all of them ostensibly mining tools, but in this moment and in Isaac's hands, they are bone saws, and he is a master surgeon with all of them, hacking away limb after limb before picking up those same limbs and hurling them like ironic spears. What an inspired and absolutely perfect combat framework for the survival horror genre. Gruesomely dismembering your foes with a variety of repurposed mining tools. That is so sick. And then comes the stomp. The stomp is such a messy, desperate maneuver. Like, doing it is always risky because the necromorph might just have enough in the tank to rear up and strike down, but you do it because you want to finish them off. But just one stomp is almost never enough, and so you're on top of them and you're just pounding away at them, and it's your thumb on that trigger and it's Isaac's boot on their head, and you two are just going at it, and in that moment you are one in your breathless, violent, repetitive desperation. Everything that I just described was present in the original game, but it's important to note that much of it has been improved here in the remake. Controls have been remapped and now feel more intuitive, no more holding 2 buttons to reload, for example. Isaac moves more quickly and responds more snappily. Dismemberments have been improved with a new tissue peeling system that showcases the damage you deal to necromorphs rather than just having to remember it. Most importantly, Motive have implemented what they're calling an intensity director, which can layer in changes to lighting, audio, and enemy spawns to create unique situations in each new playthrough. This is important because New Game Plus adds a whole lot of new stuff, including new story beats, a new level 6 suit, and even a secret ending if you can find it. So lots of reasons to replay this, and the Intensity Director is going to keep you on your toes every time you do so. You may be asking how far this remake goes in terms of changes, so let's briefly touch on that. In short, the core Dead Space experience you might recall is absolutely intact. The same core story elements, moments, locations, set pieces, weapons, and enemies are all there, but almost every part of the game has been touched, pruning back what didn't work and adding new things that make Dead Space feel more whole than ever before. And if you know, you know. Lighting is a really good example. The entire design framework for lighting has been overhauled. In the original game, you could still sorta navigate space without the aid of your flashlight. Now, dark means pitch black, and you will spend a huge amount of the game riding your flashlight just to see anything. It creates so much more tension and atmosphere when you're forced to tunnel your vision like that, and absolutely makes the remake way scarier than the original. Level design has also been touched up. Again, all of the central landmarks are still there, but there are now new rooms to explore. These rooms are totally optional, but they provide new combat encounters, environmental storytelling, or just straight up resources. Many of the rooms are gated behind a new security clearance level system. You gain new clearance levels as you move through the story, and this encourages you to go back and explore areas you've cleared. That's possible because of the revised tram system, which is now a sort of level selector, turning the Ishimura into a truly interconnected space that you can explore at will. This really transforms the entire nature of Dead Space when you think about it, as exploration can now occur at a macro scale across the entire ship, rather than within your present location or chapter only. Within these spaces, almost all of the puzzles have been overhauled. There's more of them without feeling like they're piling up, and they prompt interesting decisions. One of them gives you the choice of turning off either the lights or the air to complete an objective. One of them is way harder, and the other is way scarier. What's it gonna be? The biggest change by far are the inclusion of zero-G segments. In the original game, zero-G rooms were spaces where Isaac would do this weird Superman dive from one space to the other. It was kind of cool, but also very jank and not very immersive. Here, the minute you step into a zero-G space, you can now press the 2 shoulder buttons to free float and navigate around with the help of your suit. These segments are such a highlight. There are these enemy types who creep along the walls and then they leap out at you, and desperately searching for them with your flashlight so you can bring them down before they strike is always so tense, especially because they kind of blend into the environment, and oh, it's so good. But yeah, the zero-G stuff just feels right. Like, this is how it should have been in the original, and they fixed it here in the remake, so it's just a straight upgrade. And yes, the turret section is gone, replaced by something much cooler. You're seeing a little of it here now, but trust me, it won't fully make sense until you experience it for yourself, and it's awesome. I do want to give a shout out to audio. That's one aspect of the original game that's aged quite poorly, as all of its sound effects sound a little too canned and too digitized today. The thing is, those sounds were kind of cool, they just sounded old, so rather than replace them with something different, Motive recreated the original sounds, but just made them sound, you know, better. The audio in this game is superb, with a stereo, 5.1 and binaural audio mix for maximum immersion. You will absolutely need that. I do strongly recommend playing this game with headphones because hearing the sound of the necromorphs is a big part of identifying where they're at. It is fucking dark within the bowels of the Ishimura, and you are going to be looking around with your ears a hell of a lot, so be ready for that. Finally, one of the biggest and most welcome changes is to itemization and progression. In the original, you could acquire a whole lot of new weapons right at the start of the game by purchasing them from the shop. This was good from a flexibility perspective, but you weren't properly introduced to those weapons. Now, weapons are found as you explore the Ishimura, and they're found during the scenarios that teach you their core functionality. You'll pick up a flamethrower just before entering an overgrown nest area where lots of smaller enemies crawl around on the ground, an obvious moment for the flamethrower to shine. Similarly, weapon upgrade paths have been streamlined. In the original, you had to spend precious upgrade nodes on dead cells that offered no benefit other than connecting you to the next upgrade. That's gone, thankfully, and now every cell's an upgrade, and you can find items in the world that'll unlock entirely new progression paths for your weapons. It's all just a massive, massive improvement for the game, and that's why I really do believe that this is one of the greatest remakes we've seen across all of video games. The scale of these changes pushes Dead Space into some interesting territory when it comes to stuff like Game of the Year conversations. Like, obviously, no one should really object to including Final Fantasy VII Remake in the Game of the Year list, right? That is an entirely new game based on the Final Fantasy VII storyline. On the other end of the spectrum is stuff like Shadow of the Colossus or The Last of Us, and I don't think anyone should argue with a straight face that they should make any Game of the Year list either, since they're mainly just graphical refreshes. And yeah, The Last of Us did a bunch of stuff around accessibility and AI, but it was mainly the visual glow-up that defined that update. That and the price tag. Dead Space sort of sits in the middle of that. It's still unmistakably Dead Space. It's built on the skeleton of an older game, but it's fleshed out both subtly and overtly in ways that make this product stand apart from its predecessor. And that's the line for me personally. I just played through the original and then I played through this straight after, and it felt like an entirely new experience. Its narrative was deeper and there was more to grapple with. The Ishimura was more dense and there was more to explore. Its puzzles were more numerous and more elaborate. The zero-G segments were some of the highlights of the entire game. Combat was refined and encounters more surprising, and the new lighting and audio made the game manifestly more terrifying. It was nice that the Dead Space remake looked better, but to be honest, that was the change that I cared about the least, and the one that had the least impact on my playthrough. It was all the other stuff, and none of that was a new paint job. It was real, genuine game design that respected the source material, always asking, how can we make this great thing even better? EA Motive did that work, and they deserve to be recognized for that, and that's why I'd have no problem at all putting this on my Game of the Year list at the end of the year, and I'm gonna be very surprised if it doesn't make my list. This is not only the definitive way to experience Dead Space, it is one of the definitive survival horror video games, full stop. It is so good that if you are not a survival horror fan, I still recommend checking this out, because there are a handful of games in this genre good enough to convert you, and this is one of them. What New Year's resolution have you set for yourself? Read a book a week? Lose 10 pounds? Play through all 320 hours of Final Fantasy XIV's expansions? We all know none of those things are gonna happen, but here's one New Year's resolution you can keep: tidying up your affairs downstairs. That's right, make 2023 the year when you finally take care down there using Manscaped's industry-leading range of below-the-waist grooming products. Interested but don't know where to begin? Well, let me shortcut your shortcutting by directing you to the Platinum Package 4.0, the one-stop shop to handle everything in your jocks. Inside the Platinum Package, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Ultra Premium body wash, Ultra Premium 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner, Ultra Premium deodorant, Crop Preserver anti-chafing ball deodorant, Crop Reviver ball spray toner, anti-chafing boxes, and the Shed Travel bag to hold all your goods while traveling. First off, the Lawnmower 4.0. Manscaped say this is the greatest ball trimmer ever invented, and since they're pretty much the only entity who specializes in ball trimming, I'm inclined to believe them. These people know balls. Their 4th generation trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 is waterproof and also has a 400K LED spotlight in case you need a more precise shave. Ever wanted to spotlight your junk? Well, now you can. Please use responsibly. In addition to shaving, you can now completely upgrade your shower routine with the Ultra Premium Body Wash and Ultra Premium 2-in-1 Shampoo and Conditioner. You'll have all your skin and hair feeling hydrated and smelling fresh. Don't forget to apply their aluminium-free Ultra Premium Deodorant for that cologne quality scent on the go. Ever find yourself getting a bit sweaty down there? Thankfully, their Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant and Crop Reviver Ball Toner can solve these problems for you. Once they touch your sack, you'll never go back. All of this and more in the Platinum Package 4.0. It covers all bases from head to toe, the best bang for your shebang. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code SKILLUP at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com and use offer code SKILLUP at checkout. Manscaped, helping you be a baller by taking care of your balls. Thanks Manscaped for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.